Hello and welcome to the third episode of Philosophy of Language podcast. We are here today to discuss the very special Ferdinand de Saussure, who was uh, who laid the foundation of the idea of structuralism as a movement in philosophy. And I'd like to call Nitai, whose research report was on Saussure, to give us an introduction about who Saussure was and basics of his philosophy and what structuralism exactly is. Nitai, please go ahead.
Right, so starting with a brief introduction of Ferdinand de Saussure as an individual, he was a young person without an academic degree when he set out to revolutionize the basis of linguistics. So the book which Saussure is most famous for is a Cours de linguistique générale, which was compiled using the notes of his students alongside the notes of Saussure himself from the three courses he gave in the years 1907, 1908 to 1909, and 1910 to 1911. Right. So, before undertaking a proper nuanced study of the various tenets of Saussure's idea of structuralism, what we must primarily understand is Saussure's conception of how meaning functioned in language. Right. So, in doing so, Saussure placed a primary distinction between the study of language in the way of synchronic and diachronic linguistics. Now, what do these two mean? Diachronic linguistics is that which is concerned with the origin and the evolution of words and the meaning over periods of times. However, Saussure highlighted how a speaker of a given language is not concerned with the evolution of a given word, but with its present state. So herein comes the role of synchronic linguistics, which portrays language as a cross section of time and highlights the structural facets of language at a given point in time. Right. So to better understand Saussure's perspective on synchronic and diachronic linguistics, we may take up the example for game of chess for someone who does not know about chess or who's not acquainted with chess in the past. So herein, not only is the arrangement of pieces on the board that which matters to the newcomer to the sport, but any number of objects may be substituted for the chess piece on the board. For example, you can substitute the dice for a queen because what encompasses the game's viability is a differential relationship between the pieces and not their value in themselves, right? So, such an observation of language as pieces of a game of chess at a given point in is adopting the synchronic perspective as opposed to a diachronic one. Right now, we may go on to Abhineet, who will further explain langue and parole in Saussure's perspective.
Thank you very much, Nitai, for that very wonderful explanation of what exactly Saussure was going on about. So I'll talk briefly about Saussure's binary construction, in that he makes a distinction between, of course, as you stated, he makes a distinction between synchronic and diachronic language, right? So one being the language as it exists in the present moment, and the other being a language as it has evolved in the past. So he said that we study the way that we study language is that like within the structure is that it exists in a synchronic manner, as in like we study it how it exists in the structure as of now, and rather than it extending somewhere towards to the past, right? So of course it is a assumption which is rebutted by Derrida's idea of difference, who sort of argues how he uses his critique of logocentrism to to sort of disprove some of the assumptions that are there in Saussure's work, but we'll discuss that when we talk about Derrida. So let's talk about the binary construction of langue and parole for a moment, right? So what exactly was Derrida going on about when he was talking that language, the construction takes place in the binary of langue and parole, right? So langue, when Saussure talks about langue, he means to say that there are some systemic rules and conventions in the signifying systems wherein that sort of precede the individual who is constructing the meaning or constructing the sentence. They are somehow inherent within the language itself, right? So it's sort of equivalent to Kant's construction of a priori concept, except that it is used in language, as in systems that sort of precede the individual observer or user of language. And parole, on the other hand, refers to concrete instances of the use of language, right, including texts which provide ordinary research material for linguistics and etc. So so exactly what when we talk about language, we refer to language as a system based on established rule, while parole refers to the personal expressions of such language, right? So in elaboration, we may say that such language may be understood as a grammatical system that exists in the minds of all individuals belonging to a given community and grammatical system. And of course, such language can be described as a social product whose existence permits the individual to exercise the linguistic faculty. However, parole, on the other hand, is the manifestation of such language, as I said, in forms of, it can be in forms of sounds, in forms of meanings, by an individual who does so by selecting and combining different elements of the linguistic system, right? So such a parole may encompass the utterances, text the persons create and understand, making use of the structural system to a system that is lang. So, lang as in a system that exists on itself, and, parole is in a sense what you make of it. So that is how the binary construction of Saussure takes place when we talk about language. And Ananya will talk more about another binary that exists within the work of Ferdinand de Saussure. That is the binary between signifier and the signified. Ananya, please take it.
Yeah, thanks, Abhineet. So we now move to the concepts of the signifier and the signified. And in doing so, we can understand how, as per Saussure, language was a precondition for conceptualization. In other words, there couldn't be ideation or there couldn't be conceptualization without language preceding it. So ideas would only come after the existence of language. So in doing so, let's understand what signifier and signified first means. So signifier refers to the acoustic image, which is to say the sounds that make up a word or the letters that make up a word and or language. And signified refers to the concept envisioned by way of using the signifier. So we shouldn't confuse that the signified is the actual object, but it's rather about the concept which is being highlighted, right? So each signifier and signified is a value produced by the difference between it and all the other signifiers and signifieds in the system. So essentially, what this means is that it matters about what is a distinctive feature or what is a salient feature of a particular concept which sets it apart from everything else, from every other idea or conceptualization. So, such a conception of the sign points to certain autonomy of language with respect to the actual realities, right? So there is a distinction being drawn between what is a reality or what is the object as it is in reality, what is the concept being covered by the signified, and how it's being denoted by the signifier. So it can be reasonably postulated that the relationship between the signifier and the signified itself is arbitrary. So what Saussure claims is that any signifier, like a word in the like that is just a series of letters or even a sound, it doesn't have any existing direct relationship towards the idea that is being referenced or what is known as the signified. So, such a lack of pre existing relationship is blatantly evident from the proposition that different signifieds are depicted by an array of different words varying from one language to another, right? So, not just the fact that there is manifestly no relationship between the signifier and the signified, but also the fact that it varies across languages shows that this relationship is very tangential and not inherent to the concept. So the question then we naturally follows is that where does the meaning of a word actually come from? So Saussure herein believes that the linguistic value of a given sign is determined by the array of other factors within its environment. That is the other linguistic signs. So conceptually, the linguistic sign and its value may be understood by distinction, or that is to say, its differences to the other linguistic signs, or in other words, what it isn't. So we can understand what something is by way of understanding what it isn't. So, to quote Saussure specifically, concepts are purely differential and defined not by their positive content, but negatively by their relations with the other terms of the system. Their most precise characteristic is in being what they are not.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Now, Pranay, if you could talk about the further uh, features of Saussure thought.
Okay, so what Ananya talked about, that such structuralist-based thought that are propounded by Saussure, so as to understand the importance of the contextuality while determining the meaning of certain words, uh, has great implications as well as reflections in the field of law. Such may be observed in the conventional teaching of the legal terms, which is done by undertaking a study of a series of definitions and, more importantly, distinctions, without which the former is not completely understood. While such a proposition may not hold firm in other fields, analyzing such differences is very important in law. Further, such an understanding of structuralism denotes the importance that any attempt by legal philosophers, mostly the philosophers of the Anglo-American tradition, to arrive at a positive definition of law, one that is assumed by one that is assumed to exist in our said traditions. Such arises from the fact that following structuralist thought, in order to be able to define what law is, we must primarily distinguish it from what law is not. So we may also reflect here the Plato's conception of the forms, and the fact that an ideal form of concepts such as justice is clearly rejected by the arguments posted by Cicero.
Thank you, Pranay. They were very important reflections on the legal aspects of Saussure's work and also legal implications of Saussure's work. Of course, it is very important to understand the kind of project that Saussure is undertaking and the exact implications of such a project, right? Because when we say, the relationship between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary, what does that mean? What does that exactly imply? The implications are much, much huge. You gave, of course, the example of Plato's concept of forms. I'll come to that in a bit, right? And of course, when we talk about, of course, the signified and signified as Ananya stated, that we should not confuse the signified with an actual object that is out there. It only refers to the concept of an object, right? I think a very beautiful example to illustrate that will be, okay, so there is an object that is a banana, which is a fruit that is kept there. It doesn't lie in the realm of signifier and the signified. It is just out there as a fruit, as a thing in itself, a thing out there in the world, which Saussure calls the referent, right? Now, when we look at that banana, we can either call it by the signifier and the signified, the fruit and the concept of fruit. The word fruit will be the signifier, and the concept of a fruit will be a signified. You can refer to it by the term banana, right? The banana as in a signifier, the word banana as in signifier, the concept of a banana as a yellow fruit which tastes sweet. You have to peel it. That is all. That is a concept of the signified that is there, right? So in this case, there can be various signifier and signifieds that can be drawn to refer to the same object in the real world, right? So there is no inherent connection between what the sign is and what the object out there in the world is, right? And it is of course very, very weird if you think about it, as the way that our language is supposedly operating in this play of signs, as in the signifier and the signified. The outer world and the world as it exists out there is just nowhere in this play of language, right? The outer world is not even referred to. The only things that are referred to is the concept, and of course it is the word in itself, right? So what Saussure is trying to get at here is to show that our reality, the way that it is constructed by language, has very little to do with what is out there, right? It is only the signs and the process of signification that is important in the construction of that meaning, right? And what that implies is that all the meaning that we have is sort of constructed by language, and there is no meaning out there in the world that we could grasp. As Pranay gave the example of Plato's concept of forms, right? What do the forms denote? As something that exists out there in the world, which sort of gives a lens, meaning, and sort of gives characteristics to everything that exists, right? Everything is what it is by virtue of the forms of the properties or essences that it partakes in, right? So that is how meanings get object. But Saussure says, no, 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 that is not what is actually happening here. What is actually happening is you have the concept or something, and a word for it, and it is the play of these two things that is sort of resulting in meaning coming about. And of course, the way that we define, of course, in if a very good example to understand what sociologists mean by structuralism here is, for example, if we try to understand, if we look at a dictionary, right? It's a very famous example to explore the sociology's idea of structuralism, right? If you look at a dictionary, right? If you look at the word, for example, pig, a pig is a round pink animal, who lives in the mud, right? It's referring to more, like a word pink, pig is referring to more words, that is round, pink, mud, animal, right? And if you sort of look up their meanings in the dictionary, they're going to refer to more words, right? And these words are going to be connected to more words, and so on and so on. Reality as such is not a part of this construct of language. So meaning, there is a structure that is formed of signs that sort of gives rise to meaning, right, instead of something inherent out there in the world. So that is what Saussure means, that meaning exists in the structure of things, instead of something instead of being constructed in the world as it is out there. It's very interesting to look at in the app, of course, the implications of it, right? When we talk about, of course, when we talk about things as in, what separates a banana from any other fruit is just the fact that banana is, a banana is not an apple, is not an orange, is not a grapes, right? Is not a grape. So what it is basically, how meaning is constructed as to how we construe what a banana is, what a concept of banana is sort of focusing on what it is not, right? There's a color palette, and we say that we pick up brown, right? Now of course, different cultures have like different ways of dividing colors. This 12 color pattern, or RBG, whatever system that we use, it's very culturally situated, right? For some cultures, cyan is an important color because it is sort of it's a different color, right? But like for someone like us, we might denote it as a mix between blue and green, right? So it is very much culturally dependent as to how we construe what the concept of a color is. And the way we define it is that it is not what it is not, right? A blue is defined by not being green, by not being yellow, by not being pink, right? So what of course Saussure is getting at here is that our reality in a way is constructed by language, and the way we think about reality is inevitably will be influenced by language. The way, the culture in which we live, the language it uses, is inevitably going to set the limits of our thought and the limits to which we are able to think, right? So because reality, when we make it contingent upon language, and everyone has different language, that means that everyone is living in a different reality altogether, right? Which is a crazy idea to think about. Any sort of universalist notions of what justice may mean, of what law may mean, is just refuted by this simple idea that meaning is culturally situated within the construct of language, which is a fascinating view to look at. This goes against the universalist conceptions that are given by philosophers like Plato, and even like most of the philosophers that talk about, and meta narratives. Of course, in some ways, of course, Saussure's linguistic system was also a meta narrative, which is, of course, later rejected by philosophers like Derrida, who sort of take forward Saussure's view, but also like sort of develop on it in a very interesting way. So the work of Saussure is very, very fundamental to our understanding of how reality is constructed, how language works, and how the way we perceive the world is so much so influenced by how we think language works, and how it operates to construct meaning for us. And it's extremely interesting. With this, we come to the end of our episode on Ferdinand de Saussure. I'd like to, of course, give over to my colleagues to share their comments about what they took back from the session, and what and from this episode, from the discussions, from the research, and everything. I think Nitai, please, it was your report, so your comments will be welcome first.
Right. So Saussure was extremely enlightening, as Abhinav rightly pointed out, and the implications of his work on that of the prior philosophers, as well as those coming forward. Right. So that was one thing that was extremely interesting. Further, the the distinction that he brought out in synchronic and diachronic linguistics was something that was quite eye-opening, and also the distinction between the langue and the parole, and how that works, and how the language functions within the langue and parole, was extremely enlightening. So these are some takeaways from if Pranay would like to share his thoughts next.
Yeah, so I found it really informative this session, and particularly what Abhineet said about universalism and how most philosophers argue for it. But uh, reading reading Saussure, we can see that within the bounds of language, we can refute this universalism, and it takes it forms immense uh, importance in the current culture where uh, many countries try to force their idea onto us and try to print a perfect image of what is equality and what is liberty according to them. But like Saussure says that such notions are just not possible. And I think that's what I took away from this session. If Ananya has anything to add.
Yeah, thanks. So, yeah, as you guys rightly said, I think the concepts given by Saussure was very defining and also pioneering in a sense in talking about the interaction between language and philosophy. So, most importantly, like what I found interesting was the idea of signifier and signified, and especially how he said that these two are still removed from reality, even though the ideas they may relate to are something which you can see in real life. They are not limited to what you see in reality. So that was very interesting. And thanks for the really nice discussion. This was really new and interesting.
Thank you, everyone. It was really interesting to discuss Assure. And next, we'll of course be discussing the mega giant of philosophy who has just changed the way that we have looked about philosophy for. I mean, the way that we have looked philosophy for thousands of years was just, deconstructed, in a very beautiful manner. And the philosopher that we are, of course, going to be discussing is Jacques Derrida, who also happens to be one of my favorite philosophers to talk about, especially the impact of his work. I mean, all of the people that we are discussing have had such great impact on philosophy. It is very, very I mean, it's criminal to sort of to undermine any of their influence, but like the influence of all these philosophers has been immense in the way that we think, not just in terms of philosophy, but almost every discipline that we can conceivably imagine. It will be very, very a very wonderful discussion that is coming up next in the last and in the final substantive episode of our podcast on philosophy of language. So yeah, please stay tuned till then, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you very much.